Food is not our source of energy. We do not obtain fuel from eating. In order for this to be true, food would have to provide the energy it needs to metabolize itself. The reason this doesn't make any sense is because if you need food as fuel, you can't burn that fuel in order to obtain the fuel from food. So the idea is you eat food, you metabolize it, you break it down into molecules, and those molecules are then going to be formed into the structures that the body needs to then use for cellular processes, thinking, moving, any kind of activity. That energy you've already gotten in order to metabolize it now has to be turned into a structure, and it's also the energy you use to turn it into a structure, and then you need to burn that energy in order to actually expend it. So if I want to go on a walk, I have to burn that as energy. But you still need a source of biomass. So not only do you use food to metabolize itself, you need food to rebuild itself afterwards, and then you need food to metabolize itself again to actually provide energy for these different cellular processes. And then finally, you need food again to rebuild itself in order to actually have biomass, to have cell repair, to have tissue and hormones and neurotransmitters and everything. Let's use an analogy. Let's take a train. And of course, the train uses coal as a fuel source. And this train needs to power itself. So you have to break the train down in order to use it as coal to fuel the train. Or when you've already broken the train down. But let's say you do that and you travel. Even though there's no more biomass to travel with, you would then still have to rebuild the train from the coal, even though you've used it up, you've burnt that, you've used it as fuel to travel. So the food can't provide the energy for its own metabolism because that would leave no energy to be used as biomass. And that would mean that this cycle, so you can't borrow from a previous train because it had to do all those same steps since the beginning of life. Why would any organism that has biomass use food as the fuel source? The amount of hurdles we have to jump through to get food as a fuel source and as a biomass is so much you would never exist. You would have to be some kind of non-corporeal organism to use food as fuel because you wouldn't be able to use it as biomass if it's used as fuel. So where does the coal come from? Where does the fuel of the body come from? We know that it is electricity, which is the flow of electrons. So we need a source of electrons. And the easiest place to get that is through photosynthesis, and that's exactly what we do. But it's a different kind of photosynthesis than what plants use. Plants use it for biomass. They have a very specialized type of photosynthesis. We, and every other organism, has a very broad type of photosynthesis, which is through melanin, which is different than chlorophyll because it can absorb the entire range of the electromagnetic spectrum of light, from gamma rays and X-rays and ultraviolet rays to the color yellow. It absorbs that light energy, and it takes the water molecule that exists in our body in the cell, and it separates it in the same way that chlorophyll does. By separating hydrogen and oxygen, you're creating electrons, and these electrons will then ultimately be used by the cell to start all of those processes of metabolism, of ATP, of everything. For every 2 water molecules, that will provide 2 oxygen molecules, and it will provide 4 hydrogen molecules and 4 high energy electrons that can be diffused to the cell. Now, another difference between melanin and chlorophyll is that chlorophyll loses the water molecule after it does photosynthesis. With melanin, the water molecule can actually be reformed after that, so it can keep producing energy, and that's how you're able to sustain energy throughout the day and how you can maintain the ATP load that you need to, which is about 100 pounds of ATP. You don't even need to have food in the day to have energy because your energy is not coming from food. Your biomass is, but not your energy. Now, plants do still have melanin, especially in their fruit, and that's where the antioxidant properties come from. Melanin is the main source of antioxidation. Why? Because oxygen is acidic, it's damaging, it's reactive oxygen species destroys cells, it destroys and poisons the blood. It has to be removed. Because melanin can neutralize the oxygen, the reactive oxygen, by pairing it with a hydrogen molecule, it can make it safe. Remember, from 2 water molecules, it yields 4 hydrogen, 4 high energy electrons, and 2 oxygen molecules. When those oxygen molecules are ready to be removed from the body, they will get paired with the biomass waste product, which is a single carbon molecule. So now you have CO2, and that's going to be carried by the blood into the lungs, and you're going to breathe that out. Most of your biomass is breathed out through this process. So the only reason why we need oxygen in the body is because it's part of water, and we need that for the photosynthesis of light and melanin in order to supply our base electrons, our base energy. Our lung tissue actually prevents oxygen from coming in that we breathe through the atmosphere. Why would you need to breathe through the atmosphere when you're made up of 70% water and you have all of that oxygen? But even that's false, because we don't use oxygen for energy other than that splitting of the water molecule. It's kind of like a necessary evil. You have to get rid of it because it's poisonous to leave oxygen by itself. The sun is not the only source of light that we can photosynthesize. We actually have melanin in the interior of our body. And the interior of our body can produce light and does produce light. And it's producing light all the time because this energy process doesn't ever stop. You have an ongoing flow of energy of cellular processes that never stops until you die. You can fast for a week and still have energy. You'll slowly lose biomass because you're not replenishing it, but you still have energy. Light is produced internally when you're exercising, moving around, when you're elated, when you're awe-inspired, when you're thrilled, or you're in a dangerous situation, you're motivated, determined, when you're just feeling good, when you're having all these kinds of emotions, you're feeling energized because you're producing light. All of these different processes are generating light, which your body is using for energy. And the type of light, the type of wavelength of light changes the kind of energy that you're able to use, changes your body's physiological response, the biochemical response. Seeing something inspirational or motivational is a different wavelength of light that your body produces than seeking an adrenaline thrill. That's a different kind of wavelength of light versus the sunlight, versus the moonlight, versus your computer screen. Any source of light has an effect. Every color of light, the way your room looks, the color of your room, all of that has an effect on your energy because that is where you get energy from, which is the light and the water and the melanin's dissociation of that. You might say that you feel energy when you eat something, and that is entirely dependent on because you like that food, because you are excited to have eaten that food, and that's what's producing that energy. You could have that same meal when you're having a bad day, or it's just a bad experience of all of those same ingredients and not feel energized, because the energy is not coming from the food, it's coming from within, coming from yourself, or coming from the sun if you're outside. One final thing, because the type of light matters. When you're on blue light on TV and phone screens and everything, it's telling your body that it's daytime. That's the reaction to blue light because of the blue sky. That's what the body's evolved and used to. So when it's nighttime and these blue screens are in your face, that's like coming home from a long day of work and then getting a call and saying, hey, we need you to come in for an extra full shift for the entire night. You're basically giving your cells a double shift every time you're turning on these blue screens. And the resting period is just as important. The wavelength matters. You need more red lights, more green lights, like with nature and stuff like that. They all have different kinds of effects. You could thrive on the worst ingredients and starve on the best ingredients. What matters is your will and your dreams, the light of your life. What sparks and spurs you on, that is the source of energy.